Lesson 7 is another easy one. 212 adjectives, what the book starts out with. Now, 212 adjectives is not the term that the book uses, but it's a perfectly simple term. A 212 adjective is named because in the lexical entry, that is to say, the way that it looks in the dictionary, is always going to be as follows. Malus, mala, malum. The book gives the example of bonus, bona, bonum. This is one category out of a total of 2 adjectives. There are 212 adjectives, and later in the book you will learn that there are 333 adjectives. Forget about 333 adjectives right now. We're dealing with 212 adjectives. 212 adjectives have the following lexical entry: bonus, bona, and bonum. I refer to them as 212 adjectives because bonus is a second declension masculine, just like amicus. Bona is a first declension feminine, just like puella, or like the feminine form of friend, amica. And finally, bonum is a second declension neuter, just like the book's model of templum. It's a second declension neuter as opposed to a second declension masculine, like bonus. Malus, mala, malum follows the same pattern. It's a second declension masculine, followed by a second declension feminine, and a second declension neuter. That's the pattern for adjectives in the dictionary, and in particular the us, endings, the declensional endings, are the pattern followed by these adjectives, which I call 212 adjectives. Again, direct our eyes to letter B, malus, mala, malum, or bonus, bona, bonum. They are the nominative singular masculine, the nominative singular feminine, and the nominative singular neuter forms of the adjective. Adjectives have 3 genders. All nouns only have 1 gender. A noun is either masculine, feminine, or neuter, but adjectives have to have all 3 genders. Therefore, their lexical entry is slightly different. You've already seen the declension of malus, mala, and malum. If you look on page 55, you can see the declension of bonus, bona, and bonum. You'll see that it's no different than the declension of the nouns I give above, amicus, amica, amici, or templum, which are found in earlier chapters. There's nothing new about an adjective that is in the 212 pattern. But again, if you have not memorized the patterns for those nouns, you can see the full declension of bonus, bona, and bonum in your book on page 55. Those endings need to be memorized as soon as possible, or again, the class will become too difficult for you to continue reading and taking the tests with ease. Point number 2 is about the ablative case. The ablative case, people refer to it as the workhorse of the Latin language, and because it's used for a number of purposes. In the original Indo-European language, there were more case endings, and as those case endings slowly dropped off, look at the way they've dropped off in English, you barely have any case endings anymore. As those case endings dropped off, different case endings took on more purposes. The ablative took on a wide variety of purposes. Now, the book gives you a name for one kind of ablative that a lot of books, they like to do this. They call it the ablative of means. I am not interested in you knowing what the ablative of means is. Julius Caesar, for example, would never have referred to the ablative of means. It's a name that may be useful to some of you to use as a framework for understanding the language, but I'm going to make it a little bit more simple than that. There is never a need to memorize these different terms for the uses of the ablative. It might not hurt you. For example, last week we learned about the dative of possession. But again, as long as you understand that the dative can be used to express possession, you don't have to memorize terms like the dative of possession. You need to know how the language works, not memorize the jargon. Here's what you need to know about the ablative to make it simple. Letter A says, sometimes the ablative uses a preposition. Here's the full list of prepositions. You'll note that I'm skipping some in my numbering. Sorry, I had to have a little do-over there. You'll note that I've skipped some in my numbering. The ones in red are ones that are used in later Latin, like ecclesiastical Latin. I put them in this list for those of you that might be interested in it, because I know that some people are learning Latin so they can read later Latin texts. These are ones that are not, the ones in red are the ones that are not used in classical Latin. The ones in black that are numbered, 1 through 10, are the ones that are used in classical Latin, like the Latin of Julius Caesar and Cicero and Virgil. For the sake of completeness, I've added the ecclesiastical Latin examples as well. My point in showing you this list is that this is the complete list of prepositions. That's a part of speech that we learned about from day one. These are the prepositions that are used with the ablative case. That is to say, the ablative case follows these prepositions. When the ablative case is followed by these prepositions, there is no doubt as to how you will translate the ablative. For example, if you would see the ablative phrase, the prepositional phrase, prae populo. Prae means before or in front of. Populo is in the ablative case. And you would translate it as in front of or before the people. In front of or before the population. It's a no-brainer. You translate the preposition as you would normally translate the preposition, and you memorize this list of 10 prepositions that are always followed by the ablative. Again, if you would see the phrase in schola, schola is in the ablative because these prepositions like in are always followed by the ablative. So if you would see the phrase in schola, you would translate it as in school, or in the school, or in a school. It's a no-brainer. The problem is that sometimes the ablative does not use any preposition. That's when you have to figure something out. As long as the ablative has a preposition, then you do not have to figure out anything. For example, if you see the phrase sine verbo, that would mean without a word. Quickly to review, because this was a short enough lesson to do so, the only difficult thing about this lesson, I think, the only really new thing, is that the ablative sometimes is used without a preposition. I want you to, for the long term, try to memorize the list of 10 prepositions in black. The black ones only are the most valuable for this class. Try to memorize the prepositions in black. A or ob, cum, de, e or ex, pri, pro, in, and sub. Let me scroll down. Sine and super. That's the complete list for the total entire course for all of Latin ever of prepositions that are followed by the ablative. Memorize that list and memorize their meanings. It's valuable for you to note too, if you look up at ob at the top, ob can also be a, and it's used just like the English, a or an. Just like you would say a dog, but you would say an animal. you use the A before a consonant, and you use the the ob before a vowel. The same thing happens down here with E and X. X is used before a consonant. X is used before a vowel. E is used before a consonant. On to the next slide. When the ablative does not have a preposition, as I just mentioned, this is when you have to figure out how to translate it and be a little more creative. There is, however, a limited list of options. You have to plug in each of these different options to try and get the best translation. It's not a no-brainer. It requires you to put some effort into it. So look at the example that the textbook provides. Phoebus, Philios, Sagitis, Nekat. It says, Phoebus kills the sons. Sagitis is in the ablative. There is no preposition. So you have to try this list of prepositions in English, because there's no preposition in Latin, to see which one sounds the best. So Phoebus kills the sons by the arrows. That sounds awkward in English. Phoebus kills the sons by means of the arrows. That's okay. I still argue that that's a little bit awkward, but I put that down as an option. Phoebus kills the sons from the arrows. That's wrong. Phoebus kills the sons with the arrows. That sounds right. Phoebus kills the sons in the arrows is wrong. Phoebus kills the sons within the arrows is silly. Phoebus kills the sons at the arrows or on the arrows are all silly. In this case, the sentence works very well if you use either with or possibly by means of. By means of sounds a little bit strained and awkward to me. Now, I don't know how sensitive this microphone is, but I've changed my recording location in case you were picking up background noise while I record this. I hope it's an improvement, and I hope the previous recording is not problematic for you. Here's another example. Niobe begs the life, or for the life, of her children, and here's the word in the ablative, lacrimus. Niobe lacrimus vitam filii rogat. Niobe begs for the life of the children, or of the sons, with tears, or by means of tears. In both of these examples, with or by means of is the best option to translate the sentence. You will find a million other examples in which the word at is a better option, or the word on would sound more natural. But in the examples that the book provides so far, you're primarily dealing with what it calls the ablative of means, and the ablative of means, which is not a term I require you to know, is going to tend to be translated with the words with or with the words by means of. In different contexts, any of these words might sound good. By means of, from, with, in, within, at, or on. That's your go-to list of words that sound good with the ablative when there is no explicit preposition. When there is a preposition, for example, the list I showed you before, cum, in, de, ex, ab, pro, sine, super, sub, coram, etc., when there's that list of 10 prepositions, then you know how to translate the ablative. When there is just an ablative without a preposition, you have to try each of these to figure out which one sounds the best and most natural. And sometimes it may be a matter of taste. I would never mark you wrong if your translation sounds like decent English. If your translation sounds silly, then I can mark you wrong. But for the most part, it's a matter of taste. Which one of these words sounds best to you? My next point number 3, is out of order from the book, but my order makes more logical sense. The book also gives you a list of the accusative case and the prepositions that come before accusative nouns. So far, the book has introduced to you the prepositions ad, which means to, in, which means into, per, which means through, and propa, which means near. Now you'll note that there's one example here, in, that's also used with the ablative. In can be used with the accusative or with the ablative. When it's used with the accusative, it means in or on, whichever sounds better in the context. When it's used with the accusative, it means into. That's a lesson actually that you learned quite early in the book. The book is just reviewing this point with you at this juncture. Now the accusative is much easier than the ablative. Just like certain prepositions are used with the ablative, when you have the preposition in front of the accusative, you simply translate the preposition and the noun. For example, if I say prope populum in the accusative, it simply means near the people. It's a no-brainer. Prope means near, populum is in the accusative, it means people. You don't have to think about this. The only difficulty you might have is sometimes when the ablative is used with no preposition to clarify the meaning. Speaking of prepositions, I'm still a little bit out of order from the book, but again, since I'm on the topic of prepositions, it seems more natural to keep going with it. Prepositions can also be added to a verb to make a compound verb. There are examples on page 56. Add, the preposition that means to or toward, can be added to the verbal root woko, and then it means call to. Like I'm going to call to someone. That's kind of an awkward way to say it in English. Instead, you might use the verb summon or invite. If you look at the examples on page 56, there's con woko. Con woko literally means call together. That one translates very nicely, literally. The book includes de woko. De woko literally means to call down from or to call away, but you might use it more colloquially, or it might sound better to say to call off. You're going to call off your dog from attacking, for example. The book gives you e woko, which means to call out, literally. That's a pretty good translation, but again, you might prefer the verb evoke, which looks very much like the English, or rather the English looks very much like the Latin. Invoco, or invoco, means call upon. It literally means, of course, call in, but you might prefer call upon or invoke. The point here in all of these examples on page 56 are that you're adding a preposition to the verbal root, and provoco, while it literally means to call for or call forth, is probably better translated as summon. To call someone forth or call someone for, maybe you prefer the simple verb summon. In most cases, a very literal translation is not that good. You really have to memorize each of these meanings. Sometimes it can be translated very literally. Other times a very literal translation will sound awkward or silly. I suggest you look at page 56 and memorize every single one of those definitions, as you should do with every verb that you come across in the book. Memorize all of their principal parts and memorize all of their various definitions so that you have a greater flexibility when you translate. That, in fact, is my point B. A literal translation of compound verbs, that is to say a verb plus a preposition, often sounds ridiculous, memorize the meanings of the verbs, all of them, and memorize all of the principal parts. I still owe you a quiz on all of the principal parts of the verbs that you've learned so far. If you don't memorize the principal parts, you can't succeed in Latin for the long term. Point number 5, again out of order with the book, the vocative case ending, which is used for direct address. It's a very difficult concept to get in English. It's the case ending you would put someone in if you were calling them directly by name. For example, if you said, "Hi, Sean," Sean would have to be in the vocative case. If you said, "Oh God, please help me," "Oh God" would be a translation of the vocative case. It's the case ending for direct address. "Hey, you." You would have to be in the vocative case ending. The ending for the vocative is usually the exact same in the first and second declension nouns that you've learned so far. It's usually the exact same as the nominative singular or the nominative plural. For example, the vocative singular is almost always exactly the same as the nominative singular, and the vocative plural is almost always exactly the same as the nominative plural. There is one exception so far. In the second declension, the vocative singular ends in E. So amicus is the nominative singular masculine. If you want to decline it in the vocative singular masculine ending, you would change the US to an E. The US changes into an E for the vocative singular masculine. That's the only new form that you have to memorize. Otherwise, the vocative is always exactly the same as the nominative singular, if it's a singular vocative, or the nominative plural, if it's a plural vocative. So here's an example. Bonus in the vocative singular is bona. Amica bona would be the way that you would address your friend. "Hey, good friend," or "Oh, good friend. It's so good to see you." Nobody says "oh" really before they directly address someone anymore, except for Latin textbooks. Latin textbooks still love to use "oh" as if people really spoke like that. That's all I can think of to say for Lesson 7. Another easy one, if you ask me, for the last couple of weeks. Haven't heard from too many of you in the last few weeks on Skype or by email. That's no problem as long as the lessons are going easily. You'll have a midterm coming up soon, and the quizzes will continue on a bi-weekly basis. The homework translations that you hand in look excellent to me so far, on the whole. There have been some issues, but for the most part, you're doing the assignments well. I don't grade them with extreme criticism, but what I look at, I see are very good. Sometimes there are minor errors, sometimes there are more serious errors, but mostly they're done very well, and your test scores look very good so far. Please communicate with me if you have issues on Skype, Sean E. Lake, S-E-A-N, the letter E, L-A-K-E. That's my Skype name. If you want more personal one-on-one contact with me, I'm glad to do that. I have office hours twice a week. Tuesday mornings and Saturday mornings are the best time. Those are the official office hours. Otherwise, this is me saying bye.